I'll start, if you don't mind, with a chair's privilege of asking the first question. And I suppose one question I have is, we talked about conscientious objection earlier on in the day, and I was wondering about how we support health professionals if a patient chooses an assisted death and their family is deeply opposed to it, so this kind of conflict within maybe people who are quite involved in the care and the individual themselves, and if we've got any experience of how that works quite well in other areas of care or in other jurisdictions. I don't know if anyone who wants to do that first. I don't know if Amanda, you want to say anything? Sorry to be the deep end of that.
Can you repeat the question?
So it was about, it's about where there may be a conflict between a patient who wants an assisted death and perhaps their family or their carers who are quite opposed to it, and how we create a framework which supports health professionals to respect the patient's choice.
Yeah, so again, this is an individual choice for the person, but I think that we've recognised through the conversations we've had today that there is a domino effect on family members and healthcare professionals. There are sort of precedents already in the UK and in other jurisdictions around how we deal with conscientious objection in other end-of-life situations. So when we remove food or fluid, or when the person wants to refuse treatment, for example. In a healthcare context, that would be where the doctor or nurse or whoever else is involved in the care has a legislative provision. So there's an actual provision in the law that lets them conscientiously object. So their objection is protected by law rather than just a sort of... So I think that's really important if we can incorporate something like that into this, which we are working to do. As regards the family having an objection, that's a really tricky one. But again, I think that these things are already happening. So there are lots of end-of-life situations happening every day in Scotland, and there is going to be, a tug of war in some families and some friendships in some situations. And I think that we really just need to do the best that we can in whatever situation we're in to support both the individual who wants assisted death, the healthcare practitioner who is or isn't willing to take part, and then also offer that support to friends and family and relatives.
I was just going to say, Amanda's covered the point about conscientious objection, which is probably more comprehensible. The greyer area and perhaps more problematic areas is the viewpoints of immediate family members. It arises in other areas. I'm thinking back to the issue of moving from an opt into an opt-out approach to organ donation, and again the views of family members played a significant role in the debate around that. But in a sense, the argument used by opponents of a change in the law to allow assisted dying talk very often about the coercion, the pressure felt by those seeking assistance at the end of life. Well, that works both ways. I think it's part of the debate. The discussion needs to be had, whether sort of mediated through the GP or through some other means. But that's a debate that needs to be facilitated. But ultimately, this is about choice and agency and dignity and compassion. It may well be that you can't find a resolution and an agreement within the wider family, but you maybe get a better understanding of the perspectives. But ultimately, this is about the choice of the individual.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on that organ donation point there. I think that especially... Yeah, sorry, I know I've got quite a quiet voice. Just picking up on the organ donation point there, before we move to the opt-out circumstances that we have now, it was often the case, even if the person had their house in order and said that they wanted to donate their organs, the family still had essentially a veto. So that might not have been a legal veto, but it was a conversation after the death or even prior to the death with the family members who weren't comfortable with that donation. That's now changed, and I think that it's really important for this legislation that that doesn't happen, that any sort of veto by family or relatives can't be facilitated.
And that was certainly one of the reasons the Humanist Society were very passionate about changing the law on organ donation, was that exact point, because obviously as humanists we want to make decisions about ourselves, and we were finding situations where our own members had made choices about organ donation and it was being overturned, and that sat from our philosophical belief point as something really quite challenging for us. Josh, I think you were going to say something there.
Is this okay? Yeah. So coming from a social care perspective, wearing that sort of hat, in the health and social care standards, and something that's recognised as the keys to life when you're talking about someone's care they're receiving, is it always has to be, and I've said this when I spoke earlier, a person-centred approach. In families, opinions are valued and taken into consideration always, and it should be. But it's about someone's human rights. When you're talking about human rights, it has to be up to the individual. And you can have those discussions, as part of their care package, whatever it is. But always, 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 it's drummed in when you're caring for someone that it has to be up to the individual if they're deemed to have capacity. Otherwise, there will be other things put in place to support them with the care and decisions. But yes, the individual has to be the front and foremost of their own decision making.
I was just going to
Yes,
mention. Can you hear me? I was going to mention the point of capacity as well, which is a really important one, and I think that's why it's really important that we all have those documents in place, whether it's an advance directive or a power of attorney, so that our wishes are respected if we are deemed to lose capacity. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Ian, in the middle here. Oh, sorry, you've got it. We'll go this gentleman's got the microphone already.
Right, I've got the microphone. My name is Tony Francis. I'm up from Dumfries and Galloway this morning, and having had prostate cancer 10 years ago, I'm in a very privileged position to be supporting men down there who've been recently diagnosed with prostate cancer. And sadly, some of them, like a lot of men, have left things very late, and they've been very dignified in looking after themselves currently. But the big elephant in the room is when and how can there be a choice for them. They really want to know a timing on this. They're very keen to end their lives with dignity. They're going to be premature. They've come to those. They've understood that, and I can help them through many of the issues associated with prostate cancer. But I can't give them any answers to when they're going to have a choice and when they're going to have a death which is dignified. And it's a big problem for them. And I'd love to, and I'm here for them, and I want to take them back a message, if you can give me one, for a timing of when these things can happen. Thank you.
Ali, do you want to maybe say something first? No pressure.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony. It was lovely to speak to you earlier and about the group of people you work with. Parliamentary bills, the process has started with the consultation. That's the first mandatory step in the process around introducing a private member's bill. We've heard from Amanda that the response to the consultation so far has been really quite unprecedented in terms of members' bill consultation responses. We know there's a lot of work to do in analysing those and then really getting this draft bill absolutely right. It's the third attempt, not counting Jeremy Purvis's attempt, to get this bill through Parliament, and if we get it wrong in any way or leave ourselves open to any accusations that the bill itself is not strong enough, it's not robust enough, it's not drafted well, we will fall. Anybody wavering and looking for an out will take that as their out. So there is going to be quite a lot of quite intensive work within Parliament. Liam can talk a bit more about the process that bills go through. We know it has to get the support of 18 MSPs to be formally introduced. We don't think that will be a problem. It then goes to committee for scrutiny. There will be a range of evidence sessions with a lot of very comprehensive information to be considered. So while we can't put an exact date on it. We're underway, we're moving towards it, and we'll do everything we can for your group to make sure that we get it right and make sure that the choice is there for them and for those who come after them too.
Liam.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand the desire to have a timeline on this. I think the danger is that any even heavily caveated deadline that I were to offer would become a hostage to fortune. As Ali says, this is a complex piece of legislation. It is going to be scrutinised robustly, as you would expect. It's going to come under a great deal of pressure from those opposed to it and who wish to see it not progress even beyond the general principles. And therefore we need to get it absolutely right. I mean, I remember both of the previous bill processes and how difficult it was for Margot in both instances, latterly for Patrick, but Margot, in a sense, was living the reality of it. But she also knew that it was a piece of legislation, it was a change that was being desperately anticipated by so many people in a similar or even worse position than she herself was. And as much as she was keen to get it over the line, offering kind of false hope was probably the worst thing that she could do. And so I think probably the best I can offer at this stage is that we will get this through in this session of Parliament. It's a 5-year Parliament. I am confident we will get it over the line in this Parliament for all the reasons I set out earlier on. But given the latitude that committees have to extend timeframes in order to take written evidence and then oral evidence, the opportunity, depending on the number of amendments that are lodged, should it get beyond the general principles phase, that time frame is fairly elastic, and similarly for stage 3 as well, which is generally supposed to be about tidying up final kind of minor amendments at stage 3, but very often, and I would anticipate with this bill, may still involve some quite substantive issues still being discussed. The elasticity of all that just means that I think all I would be doing, as I say, is offering a hostage to fortune by putting a deadline on it. But we will work as quickly as we can, but bearing in mind that the worst thing we could do is act in haste, produce something that just leaves open a line of attack that allows opponents to stall this.
Yeah, hi again, sorry.
I was just going to add to that when Liam mentioned stage 3 and the tidying up stage. In the House of Lords, Baroness Meacher, the chair of Dignity in Dying, has been taking a private member's bill through the Lords. It passed its second reading last month. And since I last checked a couple of days ago, there is something like 27 pages, over 180 amendments have been lodged against the bill. Some of those are very cleverly and carefully designed to waste time. For example, there is an amendment that everywhere the word assisted dying appears in the bill, that should be changed to assisted suicide. Every time it says medication, that should be changed to the words lethal drugs. There is an amendment that somebody would have to go through a further stage, which is to sign a piece of paper saying they understand the finality of death. Again, how do any of these amendments protect and give the right protection to dying and vulnerable people? They don't. They're designed to waste time and to kind of obfuscate the issues here. We do anticipate we'll be seeing some of this coming down the track in Scotland as well. And again, that'll take the time that it takes. But rest assured, we are anticipating it. We will have a plan to work through it, and we'll give it all we've got.
I don't want to do good cop, bad cop, but let me cheer you up a little bit in that those delaying tactics that can be deployed in terms of Westminster legislation are going to be more difficult to achieve in the Scottish Parliament, where we will not be crowded out for time. I'm confident that Parliament will afford this bill the time it needs to be considered by committee and subsequently by the Chamber. So we may have a lot of amendments. I think, anticipate a lot of amendments to work through, but we will be given the time to do that.
Just on the point of amendments, Liam, in the Scottish Parliament is a latitude for you're the deputy presiding officer, but is a latitude for the presiding officer to kind of weed out maybe some of the amendments that are perhaps, has no prospect of success, should we say?
Well, I mean, the presiding officer has a great deal of latitude when the bill comes back to the Chamber for Stage 3. Stage 2 is dealt with in the committee, and that's the discretion there rests with the convener. I think there is a real reluctance not to select amendments, not to allow amendments to be debated for very obvious and good principled reasons. There has been a bit of a debate about amendments that are dealt with at Stage 2, but then are brought back at Stage 3 pretty much word for word the same, and whether or not that is a legitimate thing to happen. I can understand the frustration when committees feel as if they've dealt with, they've aired the issues, and amendments have either been usually voted down, that are then brought back at Stage 3. But the difference is that Stage 3 allows all members a chance to debate, because it happens in the Chamber. It allows all members to have a vote, and whereas members of a committee are able to vote. I, for example, could attend the Health Committee. Well, it's not a good example because I'm the member in charge of the bill, but any MSP can attend a committee, but unless you're a member, you can't vote. So the difference is at Stage 3, all MSPs get a chance to vote, and the presiding officer, I think, presiding officers traditionally have, I think, always attempted to allow those issues to be debated in the Chamber, and for all MSPs to have a chance to vote on them.
It's really helpful.
Can I just add something as well? We had forecasted this and we've built it into the process. So we made sure that we were one of the very first proposals in this new parliamentary term to be lodged. So that's really helpful as we go forward in terms of sort of having to queue for things. So I think we were the very first one in that wasn't a statement of reasons. So yeah, we'll do what we can.
Okay, another question. I think we're going to come to Ian in the middle there.
Ian Roger, HSS Edinburgh. It states in the recent newsletter on The Time Is Now that we put out to the membership that the medication has to be administered by the patient. Surely that goes against assisted dying if the patient can't physically perform that action.
Amanda, do you want
Yeah, so I'll take this one. Again, I just really want to stress the fact that at present we have no bill. We're in the first stage of the process, which is a consultation, and it's a very genuine consultation. We have already received comments such as what you've just said yourself there, around can exceptions be made for people who can't self-administer the medication themselves. I have experience of this when I worked in the United States, where they had legislation that was self-administration only. They then had to change that because, for instance, if you have breast cancer, fine, you qualify. If you have throat cancer and you can't swallow, then you're exempt. And on the basis of discrimination and other things like that, that had to be amended. So there is no bill at the moment. That might be what's sort of in conversation, but it's certainly something that is, at the forefront of our minds, that we don't want to leave people out of this by nature of their condition or.
I think I said earlier on that quite deliberately my proposals are more tightly drawn than previous versions of the bill, and that I fully expected to get criticism from those who didn't feel it went far enough, and the concern you've outlined is one that, as Amanda says, has come through already in the response to the consultation. But the purpose of the consultation is to elicit those views. There's an opportunity to adapt the proposals before a bill is then drafted and presented to Parliament. I can't judge what will emerge from that, but I think the concerns you've highlighted are ones that, in terms of the principle we're trying to achieve here, would seem to perhaps be incongruous. But until we see what's come through in the consultation, it's difficult to predict how those proposals might change.
Hello, I'm Catherine Owen, Humanist Society Scotland celebrant. The question I have to ask is from the point of view of somebody who's been witnessing this since the first time I heard Scott speak, which was on the putting forward the second bill. And I've noted, and also listening to Amanda and her research in America and what was said by different practitioners who came over to speak, the business of the fact that, and also sitting on tables where we're sort of promoting the bill, and people are using language like that language that was used in the House of Lords with that paper, the fear of it all, and listening to Scott now as Scott as a person who works with, as many people do here, works with people who are going through the end of their lives and witnessing what gives them relief. Cicely Saunders, who's the pioneer of the hospice movement, actually worked with medication in order to help people to allay their anxiety about the onset of further pain, and found out that she therefore needed less medication for her patients when they took it regularly. With assisted dying, one of the things that the practitioners were saying, especially from America, the ones that we heard, they said that when a person knew that they could have the necessary drugs administered, they found, just knowing that it was available to them and it was all set up for them, that they didn't need it. So that their statistics were very strong that people didn't take them up, didn't take those drugs up, and died peacefully and without fear. So I would ask, really, if you feel that is something that is going to help, in any way could possibly help this, because it's exactly that reaction of lethal, etc., administered, foisted on people, that is taking us far, far away from what this is intended to do. It's not intended to kill off a load of people. It's intended to give them relief and belief that they can die with peace and dignity. So that's my question.
Scott, do you want to say anything?
I wasn't sure what the question was. I was agreeing with the statement. I totally agree with the statement.
It's whether you think that can be put in any way or voiced, if you think it's relevant, how that can be voiced in the way that we work and present this bill. And I do feel that you're speaking for all of us in the way you present this bill, and I'm very grateful that you are.
I mean, Amanda gave a fascinating statistic, which is one that I've kind of zeroed in on and use an awful lot in relation to Oregon, the 36% that who apply for assisted death and don't ultimately take the medication. And we were having a discussion with Chris during the tea break, Ali and I, and talking about the kind of emotional insurance policy, I think it was described as, that providing that reassurance allows people to live to the maximum the remainder of their life. That reassurance, the confidence that they have that safety net is there, and that they will have a choice if they need it, allows them to extract as much value and enjoyment out the remainder of their life as they can get. And that, to me, is one of the powerful arguments in this. There are many. I wouldn't want to kind of prioritise one over the other, but that speaks to what Chris was talking about earlier on in relation to his group down in Dumfries and Galloway, and certainly will be an argument I will look to make as often as I can.
And it can be evidenced. It can be evidenced. That's the key point.
Yeah. Josh?
Yeah, it was just to add really quickly as well, assisted dying is also about extending people's lives in some cases, where when I started initially doing research on the importance of assisted dying is there's quite a few case studies that have been done that have shown people have actually ended their lives early before they get into a state where they can't end their lives, before they get to the physical state where, you know, it's beyond when they can take action into their own hands. So implementing assisted dying, and I think it's something that should be emphasised as well in the debate, is about helping prolong people's lives and helping them live a life of quality too.
Saoirse?
I was just going to add, I think the taking away that fear is one reason for this, but it's also access to palliative care. So I think a lot of people who are dying, doctors are very bad at talking about dying. I think any of the doctors in the room will be able to agree with me on that. We don't talk about death and dying. So actually bringing up that conversation can actually remove some of that fear. But it also, in the proposal that Liam's put forward, is anyone that was wanting to access assisted dying would have to have given all their options of care. And it might be that there's options that they haven't considered, that they've not been told about, because palliative care is just good care. You know, we talk about it as a very medicalised specialty, but it is just good care. So it may be that for reasons that Josh said, but also just if they have better care, they can prolong their life, and they have that option if they need it. But and we've seen in other jurisdictions that there's been more investment in palliative care where assisted dying's been introduced for that very reason.
Is it David? Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, actually, I think it was yourself, Saoirse, mentioned earlier, just in passing, about advanced directives. Is that an appropriate place to include something about requiring assisted dying, or is the fact that the way the law is drafted, that you have to be still of sound mind and conscious and so on, mean that there is no point in including it in an advance directive?
Do you want to take that
Yeah.
one, Amanda?
I think that, you know, a good advance directive is one that sets out the type of life you want to live and the type of death that you want to have. So I think that there's absolutely no harm in having that in there. Advanced directives include all things like whether you want your dog present, whether you want to be at home, in a hospice, all of these types of things. So I think that, again, if assisted dying is a kind of long-held philosophical belief that you have, then sure, include it in there. It's certainly not something that you could, it doesn't have any sort of decision-making capacity. So, for instance, if I put in my advance directive that I would want assisted dying when I become incompetent, that isn't something that's on our radar. It's certainly not going to be included in this bill, because you absolutely must have full mental capacity at the point that you have your discussions, have your competency assessments, and eventually have your assisted death.
I mean, this is a small but significant change in the law, and there are understandable anxieties for a range of reasons in a range of ways. I think what we need to demonstrate is that a law of this kind can be safely, successfully implemented in Scotland, build up the evidence base that we're drawing on internationally at the moment, but we can then draw on in a domestic sense, possibly even giving confidence to other parts of the UK to go down a similar route. And as I say, I fully expect there to be concerns expressed by those who don't believe it goes far enough. I understand them, I sympathise with them to a great extent, but unless and until we can demonstrate that this can be safely implemented, I think we run the risk of playing into the line of argument about slippery slopes. I don't believe that is credible from what we've seen internationally, but it's one of the things, as I was saying in response to earlier questions, if you open up a flank, then this whole thing can be derailed. I think at the moment, trying to keep things as tightly focused as we can is the best way of getting a change in the law that will build that confidence and that consensus, that then future parliaments can take their own view. But I think it's what's achievable at the current time.
Jim?
Hi, Jim Chalmers, Humanist Society. I too am delighted that the British Medical Association has softened its stance at long last, and it's always puzzled me. None of the doctors I know really have any great objections to assisted dying, as far as I can understand. But they will be at the sharp end, and I suspect that there is an element that they're worried about deterioration in the doctor-patient relationship. Have any of the panel any comments on whether they think that is a real fear? And if it is a real fear, what could perhaps be done to allay these genuine fears that the medical profession may have on this issue?
Saoirse, do you want to say first?
I guess we've seen, I think I mentioned it in my presentation earlier, that we've actually seen in some jurisdictions that the doctor-patient relationship is better because we've got that choice. I don't know, Amanda, have you got any specific examples of?
Yeah, again, the data is enduring on this, that investment in palliative care increases, the doctor-patient relationship increases. We've got all that data, we've got all that research, but for some people that isn't going to be enough. You can give them all the stats, but like you said, they're at the sharp end. We are keeping this within healthcare in this country. So I think that, again, it's about just sort of gradual wins and having that open dialogue with them, bringing in lived experience from people throughout Scotland where palliative care hasn't been enough. It's tricky, it's hard, but I think that we are undoubtedly in a better position with the medical profession than we have ever been.
I mean, I represent Orkney. The relationship, I think, between patients in Orkney with their GP will probably look and feel very different to those living in the centre of Edinburgh with their GPs. I know that there's an anxiety about patients always being on the clock and the amount of time that you have to have those discussions. Now, I can't imagine that the sorts of discussions that would need to take place and the issues that would need to be discussed would simply be factored into a morning surgery or an afternoon surgery session. But we need to work through those anxieties because they're legitimate. They will affect probably some in the medical profession more than they affect others. But these are conversations that doctors are having with their patients routinely. And I think we can draw on confidence in the other jurisdictions where this remains within the kind of medical ambit, that those relationships can become stronger. But we need to bring people on a journey if they have anxieties, try to address those in terms of the framing of the bill, address them also through the argument in favour of increased palliative care, not so much for increasing the quality of palliative care, which in Scotland and the UK is pretty good. Access to that palliative care isn't always all that it might be, and I want to see that debate go kind of hand in hand with the debate on assisted dying.
Yeah, Saoirse.
I was just going to add in as well, that's where we've obviously been the proposal, we've got a conscientious objection, and that's a really important part for giving doctors the choice to opt in or opt out of that. So I think that should hopefully increase confidence in the process as well.
So we've got a couple of people lined up. So there's a lady here with the microphone, and then if we can get the lady at the second row next after that.
I'm just wondering how we can more effectively campaign when the time comes. And given that, is there any merit in identifying what an individual MSP's objection is and then targeting our comments to that? Because anyone who hears the lived experience can't possibly object, but they do. So I'm wondering if we knew, is this a religious objection? Is it in some particular part of, the slippery slope that we can target our campaigning when the time comes, and how would we get that information?
Josh, do you want that?
Yeah, quite often it is the religious aspect for a lot of parliamentarians that's the way for them. But you asked about what can you do to find out an MSP's specific issue with it. It really is as simple as writing to them and asking them themselves, ask your parliamentarian, ask your MSP. I think everyone's got 7 MSP, regional and 1 constituency. You can write to them all and ask them their position and what the reason is to find out. And that you can take it from there and address what they've got to say from there. I think it's as simple as that. And then obviously Ali and friends at the end and Dignity in Dying Scotland will have big PR campaigns to sort of get things over the line in that. But I think they'll do a good job of that. And we'll see what happens with that.
Ali, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you for asking what you can do to campaign so much. Honestly, we've got all the tactics open to us, from writing to your MSP, going to visit them. The most important thing people can do is stand up and tell their personal story. In every case where we've seen somebody change their mind, which we're going to need. We need the people who believe in principle and always have, and we need those who are on a journey to come with us on that journey. In almost every case, it's been a powerful personal story from a constituent that has opened the door to them being able to change their mind and state their support for assisted dying. Once that door's been opened, without a doubt, the evidence and the data and the arguments we've got in favour and the rebuttals that we can issue to opponents' arguments help them go through that door. But telling our personal stories, organising locally, it's very powerful to organise as a group of dying people from, say, the south of Scotland region, to organise as families who've been affected by the blanket ban on assisted dying, to speak to your local press, to get involved in the campaign with the national media, to take to social media. If we go back to what Andrew Denton told me, this is won or lost before it hits the floor of Parliament, and very often parliamentarians, I'll say, vote on what they think other people think. 89% of Scots support assisted dying, and we need to get that message across. We'd be delighted to help anybody with any activities, campaigning-wise, that they'd like to get involved in.
The lady here in the front.
Maggie Smith, HSS. Just going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, I'm sorry to take us backwards, but we were talking about conscientious objection amongst the medical profession. And this was something which has kind of been in my mind since I filled out my consultation form. Thinking of situations where I grew up on an island, a different island from Liam, and most of my Scottish experiences in rural communities where practices can be very small and where hospitals are a very long way away. And what happens in a situation, and I wonder what you're thinking of in terms of the options, where there are medics who, for the very best reasons of their own, are conscientiously objecting, and the patient doesn't have the option, as somebody would have in a city, simply to go to the practice further down the road or around the corner. I'm prepared to accept that there are other island communities, and they need to have. First of all, let me make that clear. No, it is an issue where, I mean, the right to choice is a right that should be exercisable irrespective of where you live. But in the same way as exercising your rights to access a range of services, etc., will vary, the experience will vary depending on where you live. So it may be the case in relation to seeking assistance in death. And we're already seeing the delivery of a lot of health and care services in quite innovative ways. Now, I would always argue that it would be preferable to have the face-to-face engagement with your GP. The safeguard built in here is that there would require to be the involvement of two doctors, one of whom has no prior connection with the patient. So that's going to have to be factored in any event. But if it so happens that your GP has chosen to conscientiously object, I think the expectation would be that you would be signposted towards somebody that may be able to assist. In Orkney, for example, there'll be
smaller practices on some of the smaller islands. Some of them don't have GPs, they're just nurse practitioners now, but they're part of a wider collective as a result of changes that were made in terms of good governance to make sure you didn't have single-handed practices. So to some extent we've kind of moved along to a model that should be more robust in providing those options for those in rural areas. But again, it's something we're going to have to tease out through the consultation. But I don't see any reason why we can't make this choice equally available, whether you live in one of the smaller islands to the north or the west, or you live in the middle of Edinburgh and Glasgow. We'll just need to be kind of alive to the fact that what that looks like in practice is going to be different for those individuals.
Yeah, the lady at the front here, and then after that, the gentleman inside.
Hi there, Frances Campbell, interested member of the public. Just this phrase, slippery slope, is interesting me. That's been used a lot, and I think that's the main objection people will have to it, from my little experience. And when you talked about language, Ali, and there's so many objectors are turning language around, isn't there a way we could make slippery slope more positive?
Go on, Ali.
What a question. If it's okay, I'll take that one away and think about it. The key issue that we really need to get across with language is to banish the term suicide in relation to assisted dying. It's highly offensive to people who want more than anything to live, but that choice has been taken away from them. There's some research in, I'm going to plug it again, the Last Resort publication that Dignity in Dying brought out earlier this year, which sort of shows exactly why that's not appropriate. The fact that the public understand very much that there is a very, very big distinction between somebody possibly seeking to take decades off their life and somebody who is seeking to alleviate suffering at the end of life. Our opponents are desperate to conflate the campaign for suicide prevention and the campaign for assisted dying, and we need to be really careful that we don't let them do that, and we make the distinction very clear in all of our work and campaigns. I will think about slippery slope. It certainly has a negative connotation at the moment, and it's what we face as we take the campaign out.
I will bow to nobody in my admiration for Ali's skills. I suspect you may have set her a task that even she's not up to, and I think we need to recognise that it's used for a reason. But as Amanda spelt out, I thought very clearly, the sovereignty here rests with Parliament. If the public in their wisdom choose to elect MSPs who want to continue to take us down this route ever further, that is their choice. I would urge, and I have been urging everybody, to look at the detail of the proposals, respond to the detail of the proposals. We can use international precedents to draw evidence to some extent, but what we need to focus on is what is right, what will garner the support and the confidence of the vast majority of people in Scotland at the moment. That is contained in the proposals. They may change a bit, but ultimately the decision will be for Parliament to make. So I don't think necessarily we can gild the lily with slippery slope or in some kind of jiu-jitsu way turn it on our opponents to work against them. But I think we have the evidence, and we have very firm rebuttals that we just need to be disciplined in deploying.
It's also true that it's obviously a very emotive term, but where there are subsequent changes, it seems to me it's an extension of compassion. And I think that's part of the argument against the slippery slope phrase or slogan. It can be a measured extension of compassion.
I think I was going to just make
Sorry,
a point. I think what Scott said earlier was really relevant, is unpicking those arguments, is actually, what do you mean when you say a slippery slope? And once you get to the basis of their argument, that we've got the evidence to back that up. So really questioning people, I think, if they come at you with those terms, is to say, well, what do you actually mean by that? And you often find that there's no basis for their arguments.
The argument often used is Canada, and their questions around mental capacity, also in terms of the age eligibility. On the face of it, look problematic, but for the reasons Amanda suggested in terms of the role that the courts have played in pushing the boundaries of where legislation sits, are night and day from where we are. So I think, as Scott says, that there are extensions that have been brought about by experience and extension of compassion. There are things that are rights-based in relation to court's interpretation. But in Scotland, we have proposals that are there that you can look at, and that ultimately it will be for Parliament to determine whether or not those or some extension of them is appropriate.
Yeah, to John Raven, to some extent I don't understand what this debate is about. Some years ago, assisted by the Humanist Society, a case was taken to the courts in Scotland in which the judgment was that it is not illegal to assist someone to die in Scotland. And the judge went on to elaborate and said, it is not illegal to drive someone to the Forth Road Bridge with a view to that person jumping off. And if then the situation is that it is not illegal to assist someone to die, what exactly is the problem that we are discussing here?
So just obviously, for those who are not more enlightened, the reference there is to Gordon Ross, who some of you will of course recall, who used to be the treasurer of the Humanist Society, took a case, and as a legal expert, I know that Amanda has looked very closely at the detail of that case and may be able to provide us a wee bit more understanding of it.
Yep, absolutely. You're right in what you say. That was Lord Carloway, Scotland's most senior judge. But those have since been contested quite vigorously by the legal profession in Scotland. He was making criminal observations in a civil court. The Gordon Ross case was a civil court, so those what we call obiter dicta wouldn't stand up, for instance, if you were to then bring a case now on the basis of what you've just said. That's the sort of legal side of things, but I think that even if that were the case, that assistance in dying isn't illegal in Scotland, that's one thing, but then also being able to access it as part of your ongoing healthcare at the end of life and having that facilitated is a completely separate thing. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to get this in through any kind of back door or any kind of legal judgment that we think can push things forward. We're trying to do this properly. And just sort of picking up, and I know I can see others in the room who were here when Margot launched her bill in this very building in the room upstairs a few years ago. The tone is very much different now. I feel like what we're doing we're trying to deny things have happened or rebut every claim that the opposition. I think Ali made the point during the week that we now actually just need to make the positive case for this, because all the data and all the research and all the legal judgments are there. You know, we can point people in the direction of that. It's our job now to go out and make the positive case for this to our MSPs.
Bob?
Bob Scott, Humanist Society. On the slippery slope phenomenon that gets raised from time to time, have any areas of the world that have brought in assisted dying legislation decided, in light of experience, to rescind that law?
Not that I'm aware of, no. There are others who have tweaked it. For instance, Vermont, when they brought their law in, they didn't have a mandatory reporting and monitoring procedure, so they then had to go back and change the law and add that in. But in terms of repealing, I'm not aware of any jurisdiction that's done that.
So the scare stories that are running, that the collapse of civilization will result should we bring in this legislation have failed to materialise elsewhere in the world.
That's true.
And it's just as a kind of supplementary and a concern I have, during the attempts last time round to bring in this bill, once it reached the committee stage, correct me if I'm wrong, but the committee decided to discount, in fact, to disregard evidence from elsewhere on along the lines that they said it was a balanced view. And so information, statistics and evidence from Oregon and elsewhere were not allowed to be produced in evidence during committee stage. Is there a possibility the rascals would try and do that again?
Yeah, I remember us having a conversation, Bob, after it when we read the committee report, and that's what it said. It said that evidence from other jurisdictions couldn't, essentially, it could be considered in Scotland, but not to any great extent, that we couldn't parachute in, for instance, the law in Oregon to here. Again, I think that the Parliament has changed substantially since that. The MSPs who were there, who were on that particular committee, again, looking at the composition of that committee and their advisor, and the evidence that they did receive, and even the people that they brought in to give evidence, we were up against it from the start on that front. And I think, as Liam articulated very well earlier on, the composition of the Parliament and thus the committees who might consider this are very different than back in 2013. I
think if the Health Committee were to ignore all international evidence, that would be the beginning of the end of civilization, Bob. I don't anticipate it. I think, as we've all acknowledged, the tone and the atmosphere at the moment around this issue has changed beyond all recognition. There are still opponents to it, and they're bringing forward many of the same arguments. The rebuttals are that bit stronger. And if you look at the composition of the key committees, I don't see any real risk that they won't look to approach this in good faith. I would expect them and hope that they will robustly challenge the principles within the bill. That's their job. I hope they take evidence, both written and oral evidence, from a wide variety of perspectives, and use that as part of the challenge function. But you cannot, in all good conscience, I would say, dismiss international evidence, even if you want to make the observation that directly applying aspects of it in a Scottish context for legal reasons, the way our health service is structured and whatnot, is problematic. That I think would not be illegitimate. But you can't make assertions on the one hand about the concerns that have been raised that are pointing to Canada or pointing to Belgium or whatever, and then dismiss the international evidence that frankly debunks that.
And Josh?
Yeah, the slippery slope argument is something I've often heard. Making a comparison, it's something we heard when they were looking at introducing gay marriage. They said, if you let two men marry each other, what next? Well, two men got to marry each other, and that was it, and got to live lives happily. It's the same when you're introducing dignity in dying, assisted dying. What's going to happen if you let dying people have the right to choose? Well, they'll have the right to choose. It's simple as that. What is the slippery slope? And when it is implemented, it'll allow Scotland to gather evidence on our own accord and make future decisions based off of that evidence. But certainly for now, as Liam was saying, the bill will be what the bill will be, and it's important we take it forward on that basis, because if you open yourselves up to a wider bill, then it opens yourself up to more opposition and more chance for MSPs to say, too complicated, we're out. You really need to go with what's been proposed by Liam.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just to echo, Josh mentions one example of, slippery slope arguments. This isn't anything new in any of the areas that humanists have campaigned on for hundreds of years. It's the same arguments that were made at abortion. It's the same arguments that were made about IVF. Frankenstein babies, what's going to happen with IVF? And now look how successful that has gone on to become. So it's the same slippery slope argument that's been made on many of the issues that humanists have campaigned on in the 20th century, and so I don't see why we should be surprised that that's kind of come on again. We've got time for one more question, and then we'll have lunch. So if anyone has a last question, and at the back here in the green. Yeah.
this is just to add context to the other questions as well, or add on to the other questions. But I find more often than not that definitions in bills are not properly defined so that people can often relate to them. And when it comes to physician-assisted dying, and when you say lethal drugs, and we don't want that, but it's often because the slippery slope argument arises because people are not educated enough, or access to these sources, or the understanding or engagement in those conversations aren't sufficient. What I find lacking right now is the fact that the aim for medication is not addressed. It is to alleviate illness, it is to alleviate suffering that someone has gone through, and therefore it is medication and not a lethal drug. So I guess my question right now would be, what are the campaign strategies to engage in the education of not only the people who are the targeted population in terms of whether or not they're the ones who will be the ones benefiting, like the terminally ill, but also the individuals who could be terminally ill, the future of, in terms of how do you address high school population? Because when you do understand, even from the COVID pandemic, you see that the youth are actually the ones who educate their families. And that is where you see a lot of influence in terms of pushing forward policies. So how are high school students, university students, how are they educated about the physician-assisted death right now? I apologize for that.
Well, I mean, chair's privilege here, but both me and Scott could speak, I'm sure, about going in to talk about RMPS classes and talk about assisted dying. So, I mean, it is taught in the curriculum, or physician-assisted dying, so it is covered. You're right, obviously, the teachers in those environments are attempting to, they're not attempting to persuade their students in any way, shape or form. They're attempting to provide them with the arguments that are being made and allow the students to robustly to discuss the issues amongst themselves and perhaps come to a conclusion themselves personally. I mean, obviously, I'd favour that our arguments are much stronger than our opponents, but so it certainly does happen within the high school sector in Scotland. I don't know if Scott has any experiences on that front.
No, I think they're just taking their first steps, really, in trying to feel their way. They tend to be, actually, younger people do tend to have that more rights-based. That would certainly be my experience of it. They have that already established, I think, within them. Yeah. I wouldn't want to add to that.
No problem. Were you going to say something, Amanda, at all?
No, just to say that it certainly is on the syllabus. I'm aware of that as well, and it's sort of permeating through the university courses as well, whether that is philosophy, sociology, medicine, law. So I think that we are sort of targeting younger people as well as our sort of core support.
I mean, I think young people, as Joss vividly exemplified, that lived experience it cuts across all age groups. So it's not just those who necessarily feel that they are most at risk of going through a bad, undignified death. It's all those around them, and that is cross-generational. I think in terms of the wider amplification of the issues relating to this proposed change in legislation, one of the real strengths of the Scottish Parliament has been its outreach, its ability to engage, and particularly engage with schools. And I would imagine it's probably a little early because we're still in the consultation phase, but certainly as a bill is being drafted and presented to the Parliament, I would imagine that through the coursework, through modern studies, but actually through the engagement that primary schools as well as secondary schools have with the Parliament, this will be one of the issues that teachers and schools and education authorities are looking to find a way of safely engaging with, because I think you need to recognise that it could be triggering in some instances. It needs to be well handled, but I think the Parliament's got a very good reputation through its outreach of providing the materials and the support to teachers to engage with their pupils on controversial and challenging issues, and this being one of them. So I'd hope that would happen. I think the other thing to say in terms of language, we worked very hard in developing the proposals to put out to consultation. Transferring the wording of proposals into black letter law is very challenging, and the way in which the law expresses itself isn't necessarily always as accessible to people as it might be. But there's no getting around that. I think we need to be as clear as we can around the principles of this, but the legislation will need to be framed in a way that allows it to do what it says on the tin. And that might sometimes involve slightly archaic language, or language that to some people has a slightly different connotation, but in a legal sense is well understood and the courts understand it, etc. So there's a balancing act there to be performed, but it's why I think our messaging around the campaign needs to be as clear as it can.
Could I just add, yesterday I spoke to a lot of people and a lot of journalists about Jersey being the first British Parliament to pass assisted dying law in principle. I was actually wrong, because the Scottish Youth Parliament passed a motion a couple of years ago which supported assisted dying and called for greater legislation. So I'm very kind of confident and reassured that the young people have got this.
Okay, well, thanks very much to our panel. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pass back to Professor Maggie Kinloch to close our session. So thank you to the panel.
Thank you very much, Fraser, and thank you, all of you, and indeed all of you. That was a really stimulating discussion. Thank you all so much for it. Compassion. It's at the very heart of all of this, isn't it? And every single one of our speakers today has used that word and that concept over and over again in what they've said to us. So let's all remember that. Let's hold that human value of compassion deep within our hearts when we leave here today. And let's remember to be compassionate human beings. And there are some things I'd like to ask us to remember as well that we take away from what our colleagues sitting to my right-hand side here have said. Let's remember to share what we've heard today, that the research, the statistics, the myth-busting that we've heard today, let's remember that and share it. Let's remember that by the 22nd of December, we have to contribute to that consultation and make sure that we spread the word and encourage other people to contribute to it. Let's remember the individual people who are terminally ill and who seek an assisted death at the time of their choosing. Let that drive our thinking here. And let's remember the evidence we've heard and the lack of evidence we've heard of abuse of the law in other jurisdictions. Let's remember that. Let's remember that only 6% of people in Scotland think that the law works as it stands. Only 6%. And let's remember that the massive percentage of people who support assisted dying in Scotland are a combination of people of faith and people of no faith. We are all standing side by side on this. So take all that away with you. Remember all of that. Thank you all for being here. Your reward is a lovely RSE lunch upstairs. and of course, you have a chance then to have a chat and a mingle with each other to talk about what we've heard today. I want to thank all of our terrific speakers, not just for what you've offered us today, but for the work that you are doing day by day on behalf of all of us on this matter. We really sincerely thank you for it, and please keep it up. And remember that we're right by your side. We're there with you. And I want to thank my colleague Fraser and all of the Humanist Society Scotland team who have put today together for us, and indeed for all the great work they do year-round on running our charity so well. I want to thank the RSE for looking after us and for feeding us shortly. And I want to say to all of us, stay optimistic. Liam, we're right with you. Stay optimistic. We're right there beside you. And stay safe, travel home safely, and, enjoy your lunch. See you later.